What kind of ethical conundrums pop up when a psychologist has multiple relationships with a person they serve? Stay tuned. As psychologists, we have certain ethical duties that we've talked about before in our APA Code of Ethics video. Sometimes being ethical means setting up healthy boundaries, but sometimes this isn't always possible. Now, I lived in West Virginia for quite a few years, and I learned just how hard it is to keep roles separate in rural communities. Shortly after I moved there, I had to call a guy to come do some work on my roof. Now, I told the guy he and his helper could get started whenever they were ready, and I would just meet him there once I got off work. Well, when I showed up, imagine my surprise when the chief of police was on my roof hammering in shingles. Now, most of my students worked in the town, so I would see them for class in the morning, and then I'd be asking them for a burrito at my favorite restaurant where they worked in the afternoon. Now, that made me want to make sure they were really happy with me in class so that I'd get a really good burrito later on. Is it ethically dubious to exchange goodwill in the classroom for free guac? Yes. Is it also avoidable? Also yes. But actually, no. Of course, changing grades or making it easier for one student to get special favors would be wrong, and I would never do that. But sometimes it is just not possible to avoid having some kind of dual role or multiple relationship with people in your community. According to the American Psychological Association's Code of Ethics, multiple relationships occur when a psychologist is in a professional role with a person and at the same time is in another role with the same person. When a psychologist has more than one role in the life of the same person, this has the possibility to create a conflict of interest. This concept goes by many names. Originally, it was called dual roles or relationships, but that was replaced with multiple roles or multiple relationships in recognition that there can be more than just two. Whatever you call it, the point is we must pay attention to the ethical concerns that arise when you have multiple influences on a person's life. Now, most of the published literature on this topic is directed towards clinical psychologists, but other types of psychologists have to be worried about these issues as well. Of course, the classic example is that a clinician shouldn't have a romantic relationship with their client. People feel vulnerable and emotionally open to their psychologists, which might lead to inappropriate feelings towards them. An unethical psychologist might exploit this, so the rule is that you shouldn't date your clients. Similarly, you can imagine why professors shouldn't date their students. A romantic interest might interfere with the ability to remain objective or serve the person's best interest. The role of partner might be at odds with the role of clinician or professor. Multiple roles may result in multiple goals, and those goals may be in conflict with one another. If one role interferes with the other, some ethical ground rules need to be applied. Now, romantic relationships are an easy target and are generally frowned upon. A clinician would be obligated to refer family members and romantic partners to other sources for mental health services and stop romantic advances from clients they are currently helping. But what about other relationships? Is it okay to have my own graduate research assistant also take a class with me? Almost certainly yes. This is done all the time. But what if my graduate student needs mental health services? Is it okay to go to a dentist that sees me for psychotherapy? Probably not the best idea, but maybe there's no other option. All of these situations can create conflicts of interest. Should I accept their Facebook friend request? What if I found out they had followed me on Instagram and have been looking at pictures of my dogs? Oh God, what if they watched me on YouTube? In general, it's up to psychologists to use their best judgment on a case-by-case basis to navigate these issues. While clinicians get training on these types of issues, many other areas of psychology do not. So what are the guiding principles that we should use? Well, I found a great up-to-date article published last month focusing on managing multiple roles in military settings. In their population of military behavioral health technicians, many of those people live and work closely with others on a military base. It's like a confined little city, but it's also kind of like a goldfish bowl. So the researchers identified 6 risk factors to consider and suggest some ways to reduce risk. The first one they identify is there a power differential? In the military especially, there are differences in rank that could create a problem. Now, this risk can be reduced by having them work with people of similar rank, or if that's not possible, matching individuals from very different career fields and from different units. The bottom line is supervisor and supervisee relationships can be problematic when it comes to mental health services between the two. Second, how long will the multiple relationship last? The longer the relationship goes on, the more risk it carries of problems developing over time. So risk can be reduced by limiting the duration of services provided and focusing on short-term services. Third, if there's a possibility that there will be future contact or future relationships between the practitioner and client, the practitioner should set ground rules about how to interact with each other outside of the treatment setting, and really should avoid the patient outside of the clinical setting unless the patient is the one who initiates the contact. After all, if your psychologist comes up to you in the middle of Walmart and says, "Hi, how's it going?" and knows you by name, everybody around might wonder how they know you and draw some conclusions, so avoid that. Fourth, what is the level of risk for that specific conflicting role? If the person is involved in financial services or has control over your living arrangements, that's a much bigger issue than if the person is the security guard at your library. If providing services would create any kind of obligation or change an existing role or relationship, then you should probably avoid it. If it doesn't interfere with your ability to remain objective and deliver care the way you would to anyone else, and it doesn't compromise the client's confidentiality, then it can be okay in some cases. Fifth, these relationships should involve consultation with supervisors and trusted colleagues as soon as multiple relationships have been identified. It's good to get an external perspective in case there's something you missed or didn't think of yet. Finally, informed consent is critical. As the psychologist or the one watching this video, you probably know about these things, at least to some extent. But the client may not. So the client should be made aware of the multiple relationship that exists, the risks that might follow from it, and they should be allowed to weigh in on the decision. So I thought this was a pretty good example of some issues that you might run into and some good suggestions about how you might minimize risk. And the authors even made this handy checklist. Now, this is just one example of the way psychologists might make determinations about multiple relationships, but I think it's a good example. In the past, many folks have taken a hard line trying to avoid multiple relationships. But recently, there's a growing number of people who are starting to say, well, really, it depends. The argument has been made that in some cases, having a relationship with your client outside of the therapeutic one can actually be beneficial. I mean, if you go gardening together or join a book club, those kinds of relationships can increase trust. They can increase familiarity, and they may actually have the chance to benefit therapeutic effectiveness. So this is obviously a topic that's surrounded by a lot of nuance. School psychologists, IO psychologists, social psychologists, neuroscientists, and all other areas may deal with multiple roles. What are some possible multiple relationships you can think of in areas of interest to you? Leave a comment. If you made it this far and haven't hit the like button, what's holding you back? Subscribe to get more videos on all things psychology, and until next time, keep thinking. Who am I kidding? Nobody's actually watching this. But if you are and you've got the free guac hookup, let me know.